Hello, everyone. Well, we're having a big thunderstorm here in Florida today, so we might get interrupted by major thunder. uh, Mango's under the bed hiding. Uh, so I wanted to come to you again and see. Can you hear it? Kiwi's brave. He's under my feet. um, Well, welcome back, everybody, to my channel, Queen Bee SP, for another chapter of Scientology Abuse at the Top. We finished chapter 5 in the last video, and we are now going on to chapter 6. And chapter 6, its title is Another Trip to the RPF, believe it or not. So let me get this up on the screen, and here we go. All right, so we're going to start at the top here. Chapter 6, Another Trip to the RPF. David Miscavige was the MC at the event covering LRH passing away. I had heard his name and saw him come and go a few times, but I really knew nothing about him. This is the footnote about David Miscavige. He was born April 30th, 1960 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. His current position is chairman of the Board of Religious Technology Center, COBRTC, which he assumed in 1987, some months after Hubbard's death. Among Scientologists, David is referred to simply by his initial DM or COB. David was acting as special project ops at the time, mainly stationed in Los Angeles at Author Services Incorporated, which is LRH's organization that deals with his nonfiction work. He would have coordination meetings with the head honchos of the church and forward weekly reports to LRH on all church secular activities. After LRH died, Miscavige became more directly involved in church management activities, and he started coming to the INT base more frequently. My first impression was that he was intense, direct, and very self-determined. He also seemed to have a compassionate side where he'd use his authority to right some injustice, appearing to save the day, quote unquote. He was not someone to hold a casual conversation with, however. His mind was racing at 1,000 miles per hour, and he didn't have the patience for it. Have you ever spoken to somebody like that? It's actually really weird, because when you're talking to the person, you can see that their mind is just like computing the whole time instead of just like being there with you. And you never know what he's going to come out with, but it's going to be something that he's thinking about. It's nothing to do with what you were trying to tell him. And it's just the weirdest kind of conversation ever. And, you know, I've had many, many, many of these, and it just never ceased to fascinate me of how I could be saying a certain thing along a certain line, and he'll come out with, you know, things like, oh, it's hard to even describe, but anyway, how do you describe a complete total psychosis? But anyway, I guess I described it okay. He was not someone to hold a casual conversation with, however. His mind was racing at 1,000 miles per hour, and he didn't have the patience for it. But he did find the time to endlessly boast about all of the things he was having to handle directly and how he personally saved the church at critical times in the past. Boy, how many times did I have to hear about how he saved the day? With LRH gone, it felt like we were in limbo, as the Commodore's messenger org now had no Commodore. The top structure of the church needed to be reorganized to keep management going and Scientology expanding without the usual weekly direction from LRH. At first, the staff in CMOINT tried to keep everything upbeat and business as usual. We worked on getting all outstanding orders from LRH complied to as first priority. We celebrated with group outings when statistics were uptrending. I met a man named Jim Mortland, who had just returned to the INT base after taking care of matters at LRH's ranch in San Luis Obispo after he passed away. Jim and I fell in love and were married within a few months. We even took a short honeymoon vacation to meet each other's parents in Michigan and Seattle, since our families could not attend our actual wedding. We were married at the INT base, and no one without proper security clearance was allowed entry there. So I'm gonna put in some photos of our wedding here so that you can see. You'll see that all the men are wearing their full dress whites. That's what we wore in the summer. It was, July 1987 that we got married, if I'm remembering correctly. The person who walked me down the aisle was Tom Ashworth, and he was WDC Reserves, the Watchdog Committee member over all of Scientology Reserves. Um, he's now out of the Sea Org, which is wonderful. And the minister was Ray Midoff. Ray Midoff was the senior case supervisor international at the time. And then we had a lot of, maids of honor and best men. My flower girl was Roanne Horwich, who's L. Ron Hubbard's granddaughter. She's so cute in these photos. Janice Grady, which you know from Peeling the Onion, my Scientology stories. She was one of my maid of honors. And one of the best men was Walter Kotrick, who you'll hear about later in this chapter. I'll see if I can put names on the photo so you can see who is in there. So here are the photos. Before too long, all hell started to break loose. The executives in the Religious Technology Center tried to remove Mark Yeager as the commanding officer of CMO International. They also took over a branch of CMO Int, where all of LRH's writings were located. No one on the Int base was allowed access to these materials without obtaining RTC's approval first. Oh, I totally forgot about that. That's where Chuck Beatty worked. I don't know if he was there at that exact time when that whole takeover happened, but isn't that interesting? This is where all of the technology was located and where people were putting out bulletins that were written by LRH, like in dispatch form, and now they were making it official policy and all this kind of thing. So there was a formal takeover of that space. I wonder why. But anyway, um, they pulled several of us in for confessionals that lasted many days and hours. Oh, God, I remember that too. I remember that. This stupid guy named, well, his name was Kevin. Was it Keith or Kevin? I think it was Kevin True. And he's the one that I was talking about that cut his finger off on a table saw when he was in trouble. But anyway, he was in the Religious Technology Center, and he put me on the e-meter for hours and hours and hours, and I didn't know what we were looking for. And I was like going whole track, maybe I damaged Scientology in another lifetime. Trying to figure out anything to answer their stupid questions. The reports of what I supposedly confessed contained complete lies, yet I was called to justice for it. They canceled bonuses, liberties, and labeled anyone with a permanent posting status in CMO Int as temporary. Oh, yeah. Yeah, because I was permanently posted as the chief officer's organizing officer, and now um, and we had to be permanently posted in order to receive bonuses. And it takes a lot to become permanently posted. So it's a major accomplishment. But now they canceled all the bonuses and, canceled all the days off and put everybody in a low condition and started interrogating people on the e-meter. It was a nightmare. Yeager told David Miscavige at Author Services that this was happening and asked for his help. Shortly thereafter, Miscavige had the top of RTC on the RPF, and he took over directly, assuming the position of Inspector General, which later became chairman of the Board Religious Technology Center, COBRTC. One of the first things Miscavige did as Inspector General was appoint 3 Deputy Inspector Generals in RTC. They were charged with keeping Scientology ethics technology, counseling technology, and administrative technology safeguarded and correctly applied. These executives were DIG for Ethics, Marty Rathbun; DIG for Tech, Ray Midoff; DIG for Admin, Mark Yeager. This was a strategic move that further elevated Miscavige, giving him more power with 3 deputies to enforce his orders, in addition to his large secretarial pool run by Shelley Miscavige, David's wife and personal assistant. Everywhere Miscavige went, his entourage was right there, recording his conversations and taking notes for follow-up to enforce compliance. It became very obvious that orders from David Miscavige were to be complied with, as the penalties levied for noncompliance were very gruesome. Scientology specializes in having gruesome penalties for everything. It's like psychotic. With Miscavige at the helm, life at the int base was changing quickly. Under his direction, small perks such as listening to the radio or having plants or family photos on your desk were discarded. An issue came out canceling family time, an hour a day for parents to spend with their children. Another issue came out forbidding any further pregnancies by Sea Org members, with the penalty of offload being shipped out of the Sea Organization in disgrace should that occur. The message was that we didn't have time for anything that would distract us from our mission of clearing the planet. Having a plant on my having a plant on my desk is going to distract me from clearing the planet. You know, uh, having a picture of my mom or my dad, on my desk, or my husband on my desk. I guess that's other fish to fry, for God's sakes. Oh, I remember one time I went to LA to Mike Rinder's office in the Office of Special Affairs. He was a commanding officer there at the time that I went down there, and he had a picture of his wife on his desk. And I thought, how does he get a picture of his wife on his desk? And they never got to see each other. He was always in LA, and she was always up lines at the int base. And, it shouldn't be odd, but it really struck me as like, oh, he must be doing it for PR reasons because he deals with outside public. So it must, be being done for appearances. That's how weird it was to have somebody's family on your desk, framed. uh, the international statistics began to downtrend, which meant less people were walking into Scientology organizations, less delivery was occurring, and less money was flowing up to Sea Org reserves. Therefore, as an organization, we were assigned a state of emergency, something we never came out of. This meant that if one report was written on a staff member for any misdemeanor, a justice action would be called at once. Any rewards, quote unquote, were canceled and penalties were strictly enforced. The deputy commanding officer for all internal affairs, a woman named Janet at the time, placed me under investigation for a bogus reason. Some position not getting filled, which wasn't even my job to do. And for this noncompliance, I underwent intensive confessionals once again. This time I was told the e-meter registered a needle phenomena that meant I had evil purposes on L. Ron Hubbard. This quote-unquote crime is an RPF offense, so that's where I was routed. I don't know if I later talk about this, but Janadair was associated with my first 3 RPF assignments. And one time she blamed me for an argument that she had with Janice Grady over something stupid. And she put me under a non-interpolation order, which means that if I upset one single person, if there's any instances, then I get an immediate SP declare. Anyway, this woman was not my favorite person on the planet. I can tell you that. So now, it's just like, okay, so it's a crime. Whatever e-meter phenomena they're saying I have. Number 1, what is this stupid e-meter? Number 2, what does it mean when there's different reactions? It could be anything. I wasn't specifically thinking about some stupid thing. And anyway, so they said that the e-meter registered a needle phenomena that meant I had evil purposes on L. Ron Hubbard. This crime is an RPF offense, so that's where I was routed. I could not believe I was back on the RPF. It felt like such an injustice, as I wasn't in trouble for anything I did. I had been making very sure to keep my nose clean and stay in line, since the last thing I wanted was to get assigned to the RPF again. This time, it was something supposedly in my mind registering on the e-meter in a way that meant I had an evil purpose. And to say I had evil purposes on the founder of Scientology when I was there 24/7, working my guts out to forward his religion, was a real blow. I couldn't do anything about it. I had to rely on the technical expertise of the person delivering the confessional, believing he knew what he was doing. I felt like my whole world caved in. Nothing about this made any sense to me. After I was routed to the RPF, I was told that I must twin with someone who had the same case condition as me. In order to graduate, I would not only have to do the normal RPF lineup, already long and complex, but I was also required to do the whole grade chart, including the OT levels up to OT5, in order to make sure my case was really handled. The grade chart, also called the bridge in Scientology, has two sides, one covering technical training from introductory services to the most advanced ministerial counselor, if that's what you want to call it. And the other is a spiritual path, to ultimately achieve total freedom at the highest OT levels. Eh. The OT levels are begun immediately following the state of clear, each with their own end phenomena. For example, OT3 is freedom from overwhelm, and OT5 is cause over life. Higher OT levels include recovery from amnesia on the whole track, etc. These are states people strive to achieve by progressing up the grade chart in Scientology, and they're chasing a lie. My little addition to that definition. I remember the day I was assigned to the Rehabilitation Project Force. I went down to the cine area, which is like a cine studio, and I had to go into the costumes department to get something to wear because RPFers only wear black, and I was in my regular uniform at the time. So I had to find something black to wear to be on the RPF, and so I was changing in the costumes department when David Miscavige and Mark Yeager come in. Uh, I didn't know whether to go out of the dressing room or what, but anyway, or just hide in there. They knew someone was in there, so I couldn't just stay in there. So I came out, and then Dave Miscavige looks at me and asks Mark Yeager, "What's she doing here?" Mark Yeager said she was assigned to the RPF, and then David Miscavige said, "For what?" And he said that I was an RSer. Okay, I'm standing 4 feet from him, kind of at attention, caught, changing into all black. Um, I felt so degraded. I felt like, a particle, like a thing that they were discussing, um, and that there was something super evil about me that I didn't understand. Um, and here I was on the RPF again. On one hand, I was worried this meant I'd be on the RPF for several years, but on the other hand, I thought this could be an opportunity to finally move up the bridge to achieve spiritual freedom. This was my whole reason for becoming a Scientologist in the first place, and I had made almost no progress in the previous 10 years. I was introduced to my RPF twin, Walter. He had been on the RPF for over 2 months, waiting for someone to show up with the same quote unquote case condition to twin with. Meantime, my husband Jim was told I had been routed to the RPF and he was ordered to disconnect from me because of my status, which he did. He wouldn't look at me or acknowledge my presence at all. I had hit what I thought was rock bottom. The RPF had a stiff deadline to complete a renovations project, so we went full time and canceled study, of course. I was an electrician on that project and apprenticed under a hired contractor who saw us staying up around the clock, working ourselves ragged. He came to me one day and said, "Let me take you out of here." I told him I'd be staying there while thinking I'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Dutifully, I wrote a report on what had transpired, and as a result, he was kicked off the job site and I was routed to the RPF's RPF. Now that was rock bottom. I had to suppress constant ideas of throwing myself off a tall building or in front of a car to end it all as painlessly as possible. I felt that I was a total failure because I literally had nothing left. I have to be under security watch as a threat all the time. I have no free means of communication to my loved ones, and I was labeled something that I had no clue about how to handle. The only thing that kept me going was the hope of change once I got on the OT levels. I remember raking leaves behind a shed where I thought no one could see me and breaking down into hysterical grief. I had no one to turn to. My family hadn't a clue as to what was going on. It was against the rules to originate any contact with them. Another person also on the RPF's RPF named Byron, bless his heart, came over and asked if I wanted to talk. I shook my head and just cried. He simply said, "It will all turn out okay. Just keep your eye on the mountain." After 2 weeks, I was let off the RPF's RPF. Walter and I started making progress through the steps of the RPF program, and finally, I was ready to start the OT levels. Yeah, well, a lot of stuff transpired in between all that. Um, yeah, we have many stories on being on the electrical team, Walter and I. We were both electricians. He used to call me Nerve Saw. That was my nickname. And we got electrocuted many times because we're rookies and we were doing electrical work and high voltage work and everything like that. And boy, he got badly electrocuted a couple of times. One time I fell into a live electrical panel that I was grounding because I was on a rickety ladder and fell forward with the cable. And the cable hit the bus bar of the electrical panel and exploded. And Walter was underneath the house with the other end of it because he was going to be grounding that end of the cable. And oh, anyway, I laugh about it now. There's all kinds of stories, lots of stories. Do you know that kind of like foam that you can spray into a crack and then it expands and gets really hard and it fills it really well? Well, we were doing that in a studio and, Walter was, like, putting it over his head and and a big blob of that stuff landed here, and then it expanded right away and hardens, like, within seconds, and he had to rip it off, and his whole eyebrow came off with it. Oh, Walter. Walter was very Austrian, and, you know, he was in charge of the European continent for many, many years, so I don't know where he is now, but anyway. The first thing I did was the solo course. This is where a person is trained to do specific procedures on themselves. Most of the OT levels are done solo, using an e-meter to note reactions to thoughts. As part of this, I read all of the basic books, which I had never done up to then, despite being a Scientologist and Sea Org member for nearly a decade at that point. What struck me the most was how little the information contained in these books was applied, even by the top Scientologists in the world. It was as if the technology was one thing and what was really done was something else entirely. LRH preaches about freedom, happiness, raised awareness, improving communication and relationships. Yet at the very top of the church, these basic fundamentals are banned with such force. Yeah, and LRH may have said those things, but that certainly isn't what he did. in the real world, and it's not a church. It's a cult. I hate it every time I say church, but, I was newly out when I wrote these things. With the solo course complete, I began the OT levels. The actual materials for the OT levels are available for review on the internet, so I won't try to re-explain them here. Yeah, it's crazy, it's science fiction, and, Scientologists believe that if you, are exposed to the material before you're ready for it, then you can get sick and die, and LRH explained how, like, he broke his back researching the materials or something like that. Anyway, he's a liar, but, you believe that in Scientology, so you don't get to know what your upper levels are until, like, decades after you're already in and totally life invested into Scientology. And then you read this stuff and you go, "Okay, is this what we all believe?" At the end of one of the levels, I obtained a certificate for having achieved freedom from overwhelm. I determined that I now had to start acting the part. No more crying, complaining, or acting like something was difficult. That was no longer an option. Plus, what they call case on post, any dramatization of misemotion, is an RPF offense. And I swore to myself that after I completed this program, I would never do the RPF again. I then arrived to the final step of my program, where I was allowed to see the document that supposedly contained the whole reason for my RPF assignment. In bold letters, it stated, "Opinion. She's thinking about LRH." I was in shock. I thought, my whole world was turned upside down because of an opinion? Okay, just so you know, it was Jana Dare again who wrote that stupid opinion in my folder. She's not even an auditor, she's not even a case supervisor. That's her stupid opinion. I never once uttered the words L. Ron Hubbard or LRH while the e-meter was supposedly reacting, though it was reported I had. Honestly, at that point, I could only laugh, as there I was, now at the top of the grade chart, something people work towards for years and spend a small fortune to achieve. I no longer thought I was going insane, for I knew without a doubt that the RPF assignment was an injustice. Within a few weeks, my twin and I were approved to graduate, and I returned to CMO Int. Well, I was really happy to be off the rehabilitation project force, I can tell you that. And I decided I'm not doing this ever again. Um, and, you know, I was now OT5, and, after I got off, I started, uh, my OT6 and got on to OT7 right away. So I continued with all that. But, sometime I'll have to talk about the OT levels specifically in its own video because, that's its own mind warping weirdness. And there's a lot to it. So one day we'll do something about that. All right. Well, the next chapter is going to be kind of a longer chapter, and it is called Scientology Celebrities. Mm. Yes, so there's plenty to say about that. Um, I'll try to get that one done in the next couple days and get that up for everybody to see as well. And my husband's coming home today from Texas. Hooray! And we have a couple things up our sleeves that we're going to bring to you as well. So be sure to subscribe and set your notifications so that you know whenever I post something on my channel. I really appreciate you all being here, taking the time to listen, and I love all of your comments. All right, until next time. Bye.